Hello, happy Friday, and welcome to Normal Islands Live. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'm joined by the main man himself, Kevin Logan. Kevin, I'm so glad you're back.
It's glorious to be here. Any second with you is not a second wasted.
Each intro with you and praise, it tops the one before it. I can't ever keep up. All I can say is, though, I love Fridays with you. It's a fun Friday, although the stories aren't so fun, but at least I get to spend the next hour and a half with you. And a producer who just said it. He just said it, and me, for those that couldn't hear.
They can hear on my end, though, so just bear that in mind, Sarah. When you think you're not
True.
Like, it's not going through to the turn left people, but my people can hear you. So,
that's quite funny. It's almost like you got an exclusive on your end.
Exactly. Behind the scenes, yeah.
We've got a great show coming up for you tonight. Nigel Farage claims he can't be bought. A new flotilla will be embarking on a mission to bring aid to Cuba, with an exclusive interview with Progressive International's James Schneider, and the huge news that the ban on Palestine Action has been ruled unlawful by the High Court. You can help us grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member for just 99p. On to our first story. Politicians aren't usually one for telling jokes, but Nigel Farage came out with his best joke yet. He claims he can't be bought. Farage uploaded a Reform Party hype video of their latest event and tweeted, "I can't be bullied. I can't be bought. I've stood for the same principles for many decades." Surely no one believes this. I mean, for those that do, let's go through and test to see whether Nigel Farage is an independent politician. Farage accepted gifts worth £10,000 from Abu Dhabi. Farage's latest register of interest shows that he accepted flights and accommodation to attend the Abu Dhabi Formula One Grand Prix in December, paid for by the regime that runs the capital of the United Arab Emirates. This included a front row paddock pass to the event worth £4,500. The records show that Farage also attended meetings during his visit. The Reform leader has previously mocked Prime Minister Keir Starmer for receiving gifts from donors. How about this when he flew to the US and attended the Republican National Convention? Capital HQ, a right-wing PR consultancy previously linked to jailed hard-right political activist Steve Bannon, has been arranging hotels, transport and media appearances in the US for the Clacton MP, what appears to be a no-fee arrangement. The consultancy has not declared any payments or reimbursement from Farage, but the MP has declared none of this additional help on the UK Register of Interests, claiming instead that the whole trip was funded by the Brexit backer Christopher Harben. It's well documented that Farage has links to the American ultra-conservative movement. This is him shaking hands with a January 6th rioter at the Florida Republican Party fundraiser in March 2025 at a $25,000 a seat event. 7 months later, he belatedly registered, receiving a fee for the speaking engagement from a company called Imperial Independent Media, operating from Washington but registered in Alaska. His parliamentary register shows 3 installments totaling £25,972. This next part is very interesting. Byline Times can reveal that Farage's benefactor is a pro-Trump political lobbyist embedded in the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 ecosystem, the US conservative plan to dismantle climate policy, rights for women and ethnic minorities, and democratic safeguards. He also has ties to evangelical groups in the US with a history of anti-LGBTQ and anti-abortion activism, and appears to be working actively with Farage to bring this Project 2025 style ideology to Britain. So he has links to anti-abortion groups, which makes his random outburst on abortion back in November 2024 all the more clearer. Nigel Farage suggests MPs should debate rolling back abortion limits. Reform UK leader says it would be worthy discussion and Parliament should get more time to debate things people talk about at home. Remember, that was, completely out of the blue. But Farage is cheap. Incredibly cheap, actually. You could buy him for £71.
Now, it's a bit early in the day, so all I've got actually is coffee, but I hope you enjoy a few pints with the lads tonight. Up the rah!
Sorry. Yes, Farage sells himself for £71 on Cameo and will make a personal video for you. In that instance, he didn't realise he was saying up the IRA. Now, these are just a handful of examples of personal gifts and donations, but what about the political parties Farage led, namely Reform? Christopher Harburn donated more than £15 million over several years, although some estimates say it's more than £22 million, to the Brexit Party and Reform, including the recent £9 million donation, the largest donation in UK political history. Media proprietor Richard Desmond gave £1.3 million to UKIP. Aaron Banks, also with £1 million to UKIP. Paul Sykes, another $1 million to UKIP. Jeremy Hosking, £1.7 million to the Brexit Party and Reform. Nick Candy donated almost £1 million, specifically £990,000 to Reform. Fiona Cottrell gave £750,000 to Reform in 2025. Zahir Youssef, head of policy, bought his way into Reform with £200,000, and Claudia Harmsworth, £50,000 to Reform. Farage seems to always be extremely close with wealthy people. He also claims that he stood for the same principles for decades. Many people don't agree with Farage, but would say that he means what he says, and I have put myself in that camp too, namely on immigration. He has seemingly never changed his view on it, but his view on immigration isn't even based on principle. He isn't against free movement of people when they're rich. Led by Donkeys produced this short film showing how he helps the rich acquire visas into the UK.
Nigel Farage likes borders.
Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders. Borders.
And he doesn't like migrants.
Migrants. Migrants. Migrants. Hundreds of migrants. Economic migrants.
Sometimes he stands on top of the White Cliffs of Dover, pointing at migrants who are trying to reach the UK and qualify for a British passport in the hope of a better life. But it turns out there are some economic migrants that Nigel likes, and some borders he's happy to help them cross. Take a look at the new Register of Members' Interests, where MPs have to declare which second jobs they've taken. It turns out Farage was just paid £40,000 by a US-based company called Nomad Capitalist. According to their website, Nomad's mission is to help economic migrants transcend borders. But of course, these migrants are not fleeing persecution or desperate poverty. No, they're multi-millionaires fleeing the taxman. And Nomad Capitalist is a wealth consultancy that advises them on how to qualify for passports from different countries so they can offshore their money. So, if you're a wealthy economic migrant, how can Nomad, and by extension Nigel Farage, help you? Well, Nomad say they can grow your passport portfolio and get you multiple second citizenships in different countries. They even tell people to leave your country now and dismiss America and Britain as legacy brand countries. Nomad Capitalists run the Nomad Passport Index, ranking the best passports that economic migrants should try to get their hands on, while showing them how to do it. Farage was just paid £40,000 to give a keynote speech at the Nomad International Conference in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Hundreds of wannabe taxation migrants gathered there to learn how they too can qualify for second, third and fourth passports from 28 different countries. And Nigel Farage was there to inspire them.
I was invited to speak to this group 2 years ago. This audience is about 3 times the size.
Indeed, Nomad billed its conference, the one where Farage spoke, as 4 glamorous days learning the most up-to-date offshore tax strategies. Britain is a wealthy country, but the gap between rich and poor is now, with the exception of the United States, the highest in the developed world. Our public services, like the NHS and schools, are crumbling. And one reason for all this is the ease with which the super rich can move their money overseas to avoid paying their fair share of tax. They can do that because there's an entire industry that exists to help them do it legally. And a British MP, Nigel Farage, works for that industry. For Farage, a world without borders is fine, as long as it's only for the super rich.
I think that's an excellent video, by the way, from Led by Donkeys, but it completely exposes him. So when people say, do you know what, at least he's principled, I don't agree with him, but he means what he says, clearly not true, because immigration, the biggest thing he talks about, his entire career, And yet he loves immigration as long as you're rich. And that, I think it's worth pointing out when you listen to politicians who say we need to bring down immigration and that immigration is a problem. You need to understand that they're only talking about working class immigrants. They're not talking about rich immigrants. So it's not a point of policy. All right. He's against working class people crossing borders. But if you're rich, that's fine. It's not very principled, is it? Kevin, the most bought man in political history, is claiming he can't be bought. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, as you point out, he's arguably the most bought man in UK history. And one of the problems, of course, with the political establishment being as corrupt as they are, is that they can't really call him on it because they're also thick as thieves with exactly the same set of people that do exactly the same set of things. You went through there a litany of ways in which he is compromised financially, as well, of course, as politically, because as a person who likes to point out about how he wants to defend women and girls from Pakistani rape gangs, he's also absolutely fine with Jeffrey Epstein's best friend, Donald Trump. Just saying. Or, of course, Jeffrey Epstein's wannabe best friend, Elon Musk. You know, that sort of thing. But one thing you didn't mention there, partly because I think it's more recent, but he attended the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. Which in of itself would be a little bit suspect given that he claims to be a populist, Nigel Farage, but he was rubbing shoulders with the most rich and powerful evil people on the earth. Surprising that. But it gets even worse when you consider that entire trip was paid for by the economic foundation of a guy called Sasan Gandahari, who is an Iranian-born Kazakh national who is now a UK national, who again apparently has funded this, and it will come out in the next tranche of declared members' interests. But what won't be in there, because it's a shell company, is that one of Gandahari's shell companies, an interior design company, gave £200,000 to the Reform Party 6 months ago. I wonder if any of these things have any connections. I wonder if any investigative journalists want to look into that potential conflict of interest and how this man came by his British passport, etc. Just saying. Yeah, he is a ludicrously bought and paid for person, up to and including, of course, that the head of policy at Reform, as you pointed out, Zia Youssef, gave £200,000 to the Reform Party, which is why, of course, he was able to resign from the party, say that Nigel Farage wasn't fit to be Prime Minister, and then was welcomed back into the party 48 hours later. Nigel Farage is the most compromised man that has ever had a chance of becoming Prime Minister. And it's sad to say he probably will do. And then Project 2025 is coming our way.
Yeah, and, you know, good point on the World Economic Forum, because, excuse me, you hear it mostly from the right wing that WEF is like a communist conspiracy. It's not. It's just a group of capitalists circle jerking each other saying, oh, we're going to make the world better. And it was really funny because Nigel Farage's defense going to WEF was, well, I'm going to wag my finger at them. And it really reminded me of Hillary Clinton when she was running against Bernie Sanders for the Democratic nomination in 2016. Obviously, Bernie Sanders was talking about Wall Street, inequality, and Hillary Clinton was like, oh my God, he's a populist to the left. I need to make myself not look like the establishment. And the only thing she could muster up was, well, I went to Wall Street and I told them to cut it out. And everyone laughed at her because, of course, that's ridiculous, right? That's the same with Nigel Farage, because he's schmoozing with the same kind of people that he hangs around with all of the time at the World Economic Forum. And then when someone said, you were literally paid to go on that trip by a billionaire, and he's like, well, I was giving them a good kicking, which is utterly ridiculous.
No, he wasn't. He was paid for by a guy who's worth £10 billion, who, by the way, as you pointed out, is an economic migrant.
Yep.
To this nation. And again, I've got no problem with economic migrants, but apparently he does, unless it's a certain kind of economic migrant that will financially or politically benefit him in some way. He's a disgusting hypocrite. Either way, he was being paid for by a billionaire to go and schmooze with other billionaires. If any Reform people can show me any clips or quotes from him actually attacking anybody, verbally, of course, at Davos, then please do. Because all I see is him being very, very chummy with some of the most, let's say, unpopulist people on the planet.
Yeah. And I think what's really important in politics is to follow the money. And if you look at a political party, what type of money is going into it? That should tell you all you need to know. Now, of course, I would like to see like big money kicked out of politics, but I understand for a political project, especially if you're the underdog, you need money. Some might say, oh, you've got like a millionaire green capitalist giving money to the Green Party. I forget his name. The one who backs the Labour Party, who should have backed the Greens.
Yeah.
He's got a what's his name?
Yes, that's
Dale
very
Vince, right? Dale Vince. He gave money to the Labour Party, but I think he's since come out more towards the Greens, right? He's a rich guy,
Yes.
but he's made his money more ethically. There's a possibility he might give like £1 million to the Green Party. And someone might say, well, that's big money. And I get it. Again, like it's good to criticize big money. But to me, the more important thing is the kind of money. If you've got, a rich guy who's built the green-friendly businesses and he gives to the Green Party, it's not controversial, is it? It's what he believes in.
Yeah.
What is important is to look at reform and see where their money's coming from. And their money's coming from the oil industry, which is harming our planet, which they say, oh no, oil's great,
Yeah.
And go on, yeah.
No, but it also feels a little bit like the kind of Boers comic of, oh, well, you participate in society, therefore I win. I'm very clever. Like, the very people who have financialized the entire system and refuse to make any kind of constitutional reform that would allow for, either state funding of elections or a fairer funding or an actual hard cap, or indeed a commission of some variety with some actual teeth that could punish people who commit crimes, including Nigel Farage, of course, who overspent during the general election, and no punishment was ever issued to him, even though he was found to have been in breach of electoral law. The very people who set that system up are now like, oh, you participate in the system. Like, you did that.
Meme, isn't
you
it?
made it impossible for anyone but the rich to run this shit. So the fact that we found one vaguely ethical rich person who is able to financially help in a way that you evil people are not. Because, of course, the kind of people they're getting money from are, like you say, venture capitalists and dark money people and oil money and all the rest of it. That obviously has a massive impact on their kind of policies. Or indeed with the Labour Party, who got Quadrilla Capital, gave them £4 million just after the date at which you have to announce it for pre-election funding.
Very
purposes.
convenient.
Yeah, and then of course changed their policy completely when it came to green investment. What a surprise! They're all thick as thieves. Nigel Farage isn't any different to these people. As much as he tries to claim he is bought and paid for. He's just the new leader of the new Conservative Party.
100%. Absolutely true. We're going to move on to our second story, but that was good stuff there from Kevin. A new flotilla is set for sale called Sorry, let me start again. I've got a bit of a cough today. A new flotilla is set for sale called Nostra America, which translates to Our America, with a mission to provide crucial aid to Cuba as the US continues its blockade. Members of Progressive International, Code Pink, and other direct action and advocacy groups plan to set sail for Cuba next month in the Nostra America or Our America flotilla, which they said is inspired by the global Samud flotilla missions to break Israel's illegal blockade of Gaza amid the ongoing genocide in the Palestinian exclave. We are sailing to Cuba, bringing critical humanitarian aid for its people, the flotilla organisers said on their website. The Trump administration is strangling the island, cutting off fuel, flights and critical supplies for survival. The consequences are lethal for newborns and parents, for the elderly and the sick. According to Al Jazeera, Cubans are facing an incredibly tough time due to the US embargoes. A US oil blockade is causing a severe energy crisis in Cuba, as the government has been forced to ration fuel and cut electricity for many hours a day. Bus stops are empty and families are turning to wood and coal for cooking, living through near constant power outages amid an economic crisis worsened by the Trump administration steps in recent weeks. President Miguel Diaz-Canel has imposed harsh emergency restrictions from reduced office hours to fuel sales in the backdrop of looming threats of regime change from the White House. The Caribbean region has been on edge since the US forces abducted Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro last month and upped the pressure to isolate Havana and strangle its economy. Venezuela, Cuba's closest ally in the region, provided the country with much-needed fuel. Earlier today, I caught up with Director of Communications for Progressive International, James Schneider. Can you
For the
explain
last
to our viewers
45
why
years, there has
it's
been
so
a massive
important
transfer of
to
wealth
support
from
the
the
Flotilla
working and
mission
middle
to Cuba?
classes to
The
the top 1%.
Cuban
Billions of
people
pounds
are
have been taken from
facing
the workers
an
and handed to the economic
intensification of a
elites. In
decades-long
2008, the world
blockade
came to a
against them
standstill. The
for
market had
doing
failed.
nothing wrong
Capitalism
other than
was
trying
in
to build a
crisis.
society rooted in their sovereignty and in social justice.
Can you explain to our viewers why it's so important to support the Flotilla mission to Cuba?
The Cuban people are facing an intensification of a decades-long blockade against them for doing nothing wrong other than trying to build a society rooted in their sovereignty and in social justice. And Donald Trump, since the beginning of this year, has amped up so aggressively that campaign, seizing oil tankers that were going from Venezuela to Cuba, threatening tariffs on any other country that sends oil to Cuba, including Mexico, which was picking up some of the slack, even pirating an oil tanker in the Indian Ocean out of fears that it could deliver some fuel to Cuba. The results of this are, of course, terrible. Imagine a society where you don't have any fuel. Regardless of how well organized and well set up you are going to have terrible shortages, no light. They now are having to ground flights so planes can't get in and out, which of course is difficult and bad for products coming in, but it also means tourism, one of the lifelines for the economy, can't come. For example, Canada, there are lots of Canadians that go on holiday to Cuba every year, even though US Americans can't. And they are, there are some Canadians that are stranded there because the flights can't get back out and the government advice from Canada is not to come in. So in order to not only support the Cuban people who are the victims who have done absolutely nothing wrong, in order to defend the principle of self-determination, the Cuban people have a right to self-determination. It is not up to the United States to decide what happens to in the Western Hemisphere, and to stand up against US imperialism. We are seeing this US imperialism at such an extremely aggressive, crude, and high level under the Trump administration. Of course, it's not a new thing, but it is happening at such with such crudity and with no even pretense at anything else. Trump says he wants the oil, he wants to overthrow the Cuban government. And so he is trying to do so and threatening all other countries in the region to do what he says. So when a state says that we are going to blockade the Cuban people, it's the responsibility of citizens from around the world to stand up in solidarity. And that's why we're setting off with many other grassroots organizations, movements, trade unions from around the world to launch this flotilla.
So when did discussions begin about the flotilla? You mentioned different organizations and unions around the world. So how did this come about, and when did this start to sort of form an alliance, shall we say, to get this mission on board?
Well, of course, it's not a new idea, a flotilla, and huge inspiration taken from the Global Samud flotilla to Gaza last year. Many people have been discussing this over time, and we have been discussing how we could get more aid and support to the Cuban people. But when flights were grounded and this was amped up so much, the strangulation of Cuba has been ramped up in recent weeks. We decided we had to do something very quickly, which is why we are crowding in people, capacity, funds, vessels, whatever support that we can. And please, if your viewers will go to nuestraamericaflotilla.org and support in any way that they can to make this the largest possible break of the blockade that we can.
So Trump, of course, kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and it was about oil. We know it was about oil. Do you anticipate something similar could happen to Cuba? Of course, they are currently facing an oil blockade from the US.
Well, this is part of the threat or the purpose, let's say, of the Venezuelan assault by the US, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro, is to scare everybody else, that there could be a decapitation of governments, and that the US is going to act with brutal, violent force in the region. That's the threat. But we shouldn't be cowed by that threat, and no one should be cowed by that threat. The only response to this violence from a bully, from a gangster state, is to stand up to it. That's the only language that Donald Trump will understand. He either understands the language of flattery or of self-confidence. And I think that peoples of the world need to stand up with self-confidence and say that they will not be bullied by US imperialism.
I think we'd all know what our response from the government is. They've been obviously incredibly disappointing, to put it lightly. But what would you like to see from our government to support the Cuban people? I feel like it's an ask that's not going to get responded, since Keir Starmer seemingly is up Trump's ass. But what moves would you like to see? And if not for our government, but globally, whether it's policy, whether it's anything to show support to the Cuban people?
Well, most countries in the world every single year vote against the illegal blockade of Cuba that the US has been running now for more than 60 years. And I would like to see, and I think we should see, all of those governments, if they are able to make material efforts to support the Cuban people with energy and with humanitarian relief. Cuba should not be isolated from the world with these secondary sanctions because the United States wants to overthrow the example there. And let's be very clear about the reasons why they want to overthrow and have tried every single thing you can possibly imagine: invasion, assassination attempts, economic embargo, fake social media platforms, everything that they can possibly try to do to overthrow the Cuban government for decades. And one part of that is that Cuba used to be, in effect, a US colony, and they would like that back, particularly the former comprador elite, which was highly connected to US mafia organizations, want to take back over control of the country. And the second is the example. Cuba has run a socialist society, a socialist revolution for decades, which means they have prioritized human health and education and social investment over profit. And you can see the results. Even in the face of this incredible, vicious blockade, Cuban life expectancy is better than the US American. They have better healthcare for most of their people. And it's both the desire for a narrow group of people to enrich themselves off the back of the Cuban people that drives this US violence, and the desire to snuff out an alternative which makes Cuba the biggest exporter of solidarity medical missions in the world. When Ebola flared up in West Africa, who was the first ones there? It was Cuban doctors. When COVID started and the cases were spreading wild in Italy, if you remember, in February 2020, it was Cuban doctors that were immediately rushed there. This is a country that is built on solidarity at home and solidarity abroad. And I think it is incumbent on all the peoples of the world now to stand with Cuba in this very dark and aggressive hour.
You provided the website link for people to support, but how can people support this mission in general? I'm sure there's different roles people can play.
We really need funds. If you go to nuestroamericaflotilla.org, you can sign up there, you can register, you can say what it is that you are able to do. We need funds, we need vessels from the region, and we will need humanitarian supplies. We need people to come on board and support. We need volunteers. We need other organizations. We need large donations. We need small donations. We need everything that we possibly can to next month set off with a flotilla across the Caribbean Sea to reach Cuba and to offer not only a precious lifeline of medicine and food to the people, but also carrying a strong message that the Cuban people are not alone. That when people are sitting in darkness with the lights turned off, when their hospital generators are being rationed, that they know that they are not alone, that it is not helpless, and that the vicious bully that is trying to strangle them will not win.
That was James Schneider, Director of Communications for Progressive International. Now, before we move on, I'll have to do my obligatory plug. It's 2026, and we really want this year to be big for Turn Left. We want to be far more ambitious than last year and to really put us on the map. We would like 2026 to be the year where we can finally have a studio and for our contributors to be paid for the work we do. Your support over the years has been amazing, and we are ready to take this to the next level. We rely on small donations, so if you want to be part of a media organisation that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. You can also become a YouTube member for 99p. On to our final story. Huge news in regards to Palestine Action, as the government's ban on the group has been ruled unlawful by the High Court. Huda Amori, co-founder of Palestine Action, won a legal challenge to Yvette Cooper's decision to ban the group. The prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation prompted huge condemnation across the country, which led to thousands of arrests for those who showed support, including those who were peacefully holding up signs. Since the 5th of July, punishment for showing support of being a member of Palestine Action could land you in prison for up to 14 years. That was an example of extreme state overreach, an unprecedented move to brand them as terrorists. On Friday, 3 judges led by the president of the King's Bench Division, Dame Victoria Sharp, ruled the decision to prescribe the group was unlawful, but the ban on the group would remain to give the government time to appeal. They allowed the challenge on 2 of 4 grounds, namely that there was a very significant interference with the rights to freedom of speech, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association, and that the then Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's decision to prescribe Palestine Action was not consistent with her own policy. Current Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has vowed to fight this decision. Taking to Twitter, she said, "The court acknowledged that Palestine Action has carried out acts of terrorism. It concluded that its actions are not consistent with democratic values and the rule of law. Supporting the Palestinian cause is not the same as supporting Palestine Action. The government's prescription followed a rigorous process endorsed by Parliament. I will fight this judgment in the courts of appeal." And attached is a statement which reads, "The court has acknowledged that Palestine Action has carried out acts of terrorism, celebrated those who have taken part in those acts, and promoted the use of violence. It has also concluded that Palestine Action is not an ordinary protest or civil disobedience group, and that its actions are not consistent with democratic values and the rule of law. For those reasons, I'm disappointed by the court's decision and disagree with the notion that banning this terrorist organisation is disproportionate. The prescription of Palestine Action followed a rigorous and evidence-based decision-making process endorsed by Parliament. The prescription does not prevent peaceful protests in support of the Palestinian cause," another point on which the court agrees. "As a former Lord Chancellor, I have the deepest respect for our judiciary. Home Secretaries must, however, retain the ability to take action to protect our national security and keep the public safe. I intend to fight this judgment in the courts of appeal." I think she might be one of the worst Home Secretaries we've ever had. It is absolutely disgraceful to go and attack the courts, the High Court, by the way, and say this is a bad decision. You can't simultaneously say, I respect the High Court, but also they're wrong. And by the way, the idea that there was rigorous procedure and evidence to show that Palestine Action are a threat to national security. I mean, we have known for a long, long time, at least a year, through various leaked documents, that Palestine Action posed no threat to national security. Even national security agencies said they were not a threat to national security. And the reason why Parliament voted to back it is, one, because Parliament is full of Zionists or Israel-backing people, but 2, the government sneakily added this onto the same bill as 2 other far-right domestic terrorist organisations. 2 organisations that were actually extreme. So, of course, MPs were either voting to allow far-right extremist organisations to continue freely, or they had to vote for Palestine Action to become a terrorist organisation too. It wasn't in a separate bill, and that is utterly, utterly shameless. Now, Mahmood has already faced a backlash from commentators on her announcement that she will appeal. Owen Jones tweeted this: You have helped facilitate genocide. You have sought to throw grannies behind bars for opposing that genocide. You will lose. You will be remembered only as a monster, and one day it is politicians like you who will end up behind bars for facilitating the crime of crimes. I completely agree with Owen Jones, and I'm glad to see how angry he is, because I'm incredibly angry, despite the good news. Now, Novara Media's Aaron Bastani replied to the Home Secretary. You'll be defined by this for the rest of your career, but in your defence, it's sad the idiocy of Yvette Cooper that led to this. It was never a tenable position. Right, he is, because of course Yvette Cooper was the one who initially facilitated this. By the way, she should go, and I think Shabana Mahmood should resign. But he's also right that she is going to be remembered for this for years to come. Labour MP John McDonnell criticised Mahmood's words. So we have a Home Secretary that is going to fight the judiciary now. This is hardly the language of someone holding one of the highest offices of state. You can disagree with court decisions, but you don't have to use the language usually reserved for the fringes of the right. Despite the High Court allowing for the ban to continue until the appeal, the Met Police announced they would not be enforcing it. The High Court has found that the decision to prescribe Palestine Action was unlawful. However, the group remains prescribed pending the outcome of any government appeal, which means expressing support is still a criminal offence. We recognise these are unusual circumstances. From a Metropolitan Police perspective, officers will continue to identify offences where support for Palestine Action is being expressed, but they will focus on gathering evidence of those offences and the people involved to provide opportunities for enforcement at a later date, rather than making arrests at the time. This is the most proportionate approach we can take, acknowledging the decision reached by the court while recognising that proceedings are not yet fully concluded. This approach relates solely to the expression of support for Palestine Action. We will continue to intervene and make arrests where we see people crossing the line from lawful protest to intimidate, to damage property, to use violence, to stir up racial hatred, or to commit other offences. We are mindful that this decision comes at a time when the impact of a prolonged period of significant protest continues to be felt by communities across London, in particular Jewish communities. We will continue to take an assertive and determined approach to dealing with anti-Semitism and other hate crimes, acting decisively against anyone who tries to use the cover of protests to cause fear and distress to Londoners. Now, that last part of the statement was absolutely not necessary, trying to link this to anti-Semitism, trying to say, well, do you know what? We need to protect communities. This is about Israel and their genocide, but once again, the British institutions are conflating the two. Now, despite the Met releasing this statement, people should still be very cautious. Novara's Harriet Williamson tweeted this. Met officers have told me that they're still being directed by command to advise sign holders that they could be risking arrest and prosecution. However, in an update, she said, Metropolitan Police Inspector confirms to Novara Media that police are not expecting to make arrests for sign holding today, even though Palestine Action remains a prescribed organisation until a further hearing later in February. So they're not expecting to make arrests, but they're not saying they absolutely won't. Now, we have known for a long time that the reason to prescribe Palestine Action wasn't on the grounds of violence and national security. Declassified UK has documented this. And now a recent Dispatches documentary from Channel 4 revealed the true reason.
All right, so look at this. This is Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, who made this decision.
It's based on violent action and injuries that this group has taken, including on national security targets, but also injuries to people, and also some disturbing information referring to future planning as well.
So she's sort of implying that she and the government have some kind of disturbing secret info about what Palestine Action are really up to that we don't yet know about.
There will be people who do not know what the nature of this group is. But I would say to people, this is not a non-violent organisation.
The Home Office and Palestine Action's critics have tried to justify the ban by pointing to some kind of extremist ideology or mysterious foreign backer. Amori denies all these allegations, and now a leaked report suggests the real reason for prescribing the group may have been far less dramatic. I've got my hands on a leaked internal intelligence report on the group. This is MI5, MI6, Counterterrorism Police. This is the official document on the government's assessment of the terror threat of Palestine Action. I've been through this, and we've heard so much about a potential link to Iran, ideological alignment with Hamas, violence against people. The reason that they say that this group crosses the line into terrorism is none of that. It's because 3 out of 385 total incidents mentioned had serious property damage to the extent that the group could be considered terrorist. Serious property damage carried out for an ideological or political cause technically meets the threshold for terrorism in the UK. The report says Palestine Action also crosses the legal threshold for prescription because they plan and promote this property damage. But just because they could prescribe Palestine Action doesn't mean they had to.
Matt Scher, the journalist who led the documentary, also tweeted this. I've spoken to the lead organiser of the protests in support of Palestine Action because this ruling means the ban was unlawful from the outset. They say that not only are the 2,700 arrests and 500 charges they have faced now void, but they are entitled to financial damages from the government. Some of them have lost jobs as a result of the arrests. They now plan to demand a meeting with Shabana Mahmood to discuss what they call reparations, truth and reconciliation. Today, the court found that the prescription of Palestine Action unlawfully interfered with fundamental rights to free speech and freedom of assembly. And crucially, this wasn't a standard statutory deprescription where a prescribed group applies to the deprescribed and, if granted, is taken off the terrorism list going forward, like what happened with the official IRA. Judicial review rewinds the clock. It means the ban was never lawful in the first place. It can still be appealed, but if this stands, it has enormous consequences and raises serious questions for Yvette Cooper. This is Lord Wolney's reaction to the decision on the BBC.
I'm trying to digest and must admit I find it rather perverse, the ruling, the judgment that relates to this idea that this will have a chilling effect on freedom of speech, because I think for most people it's really quite clear that you can say what you like in terms of a cause, and you can stand up for Palestinian rights or whatever, but you're not entitled to break the law.
Lord Walnut, I want to say one thing to you. Fuck off. Kevin, I want to get your reaction to the High Court ruling and your response to Wolney and Shabana Mahmood's vow to fight the verdict.
Firstly, I think it's worth mentioning that Lord Wolney was a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel. A fact that I think is pertinent given his analysis of the situation there. Yes, this is obviously very good news. It gives you some amount of faith restoration in terms of the British justice system, that if you actually fight properly, you can succeed under the law. The fact that they were prescribed Palestine Action as a terrorist group was obviously government overreach from the very start. And let's just notice the elephant in the room: Zionism. Zionism is the root cause of all of this, okay? The British government's being in hock to Zionist influence is exactly the reason that they do all of these things. They're exactly the reason that they arrest grannies and 80-year-old pastors and disabled people for daring to hold a sign, is because they want to do the bidding of Israel. That's it. They are puppets of Zionism and nothing more at this stage. The police, although they have taken a much more mild approach to this, given the decision, have been an arm of that as well. Yvette Cooper should hang her head in shame, and unfortunately, I do have to disagree with oh, for God's sake, What's his name again? Owen Jones. Jesus Christ. I have to disagree with Owen Jones on one particular point, which is that unfortunately Shabana Mahmood and Yvette Cooper won't face jail time for this, because unfortunately we don't live in the world where we actually have a rule of law that applies to all people. These people will not face those consequences. One consequence that at least Shabana Mahmood will face, though, is that she will lose her seat at the next general election. So I will take a certain amount of small joy in that particular thing. But yes, in terms of the consequences of this, it's still technically illegal, as you pointed out, to say that you support Palestine Action, right? Until at least February the 20th, when they have what's called a consequential hearing, which, as the name suggests, sorts out the consequences of the ruling that's just taken place, which will be Shabana Mahmood, although she won't attend herself, I don't think, but her representatives from the Home Office will argue why they want to take forward an appeal, a disgusting appeal, a morally reprehensible appeal, but an appeal they are allowed at least to do legally speaking. And the judge will decide whether A, they will allow that to go through, and B, whether there will be a stay. Which means that there will be the ban will remain in place during the entirety of that appeal, or whether it will be struck down and they'll have to pass either an emergency piece of legislation or just basically drop the appeal, which may very well be how it works out in the end. But either way, the entirety of this is Zionism. Okay, Shabana Mahmood, the current prime minister, at least at time of recording, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after, who appointed, of course, yum friend of Jeffrey Epstein and all the rest of it, who himself was a former head of public prosecutions and a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, who seems to not understand the basics of human rights, apparently, and of course has been engaged in a genocide, which is, ditto. They're all in hock to the state of Israel for any number of different reasons, whether it be ideological, whether it be compromat, whatever the hell it is, it doesn't really matter. This is being done for the state of Israel and nothing else. Again, it's meant to have a chilling effect. Even if it gets overturned, it's partly served its purpose. It's made people question whether they want to come out publicly and support the Palestinian cause, because they don't want to end up in jail for 14 years. And that's the point. When the ruling talks about the infringement on people's freedom of speech, that's the sort of thing they're referring to. This is obviously had the concrete effect of, and I believe the intention of, trying to chill people's free speech in regards to Israel and Palestine and the current genocide that's going on there. And unfortunately, it has in that degree worked, because I think people have been reticent to come out supporting them publicly. But thankfully, due to the work of some fantastic lawyers who've worked on their behalf at the High Court, and of course the hunger strikers and people like this, have kept this issue going. They've kept this issue live, and they're beginning to get victories, both in terms of the hunger strikers themselves and the Palestine Action Group now potentially being certified as a terrorist organization. And this is a massive win. This is just an unadulterated win at this stage. It doesn't necessarily change anything, at least until February the 20th, but it's an absolute W, and we should celebrate it as such.
Yeah, when you said you were going to disagree with Owen Jones, I knew exactly what part you're going to talk about, because obviously I disagree, which is that these people won't face justice. I don't think Owen agrees with himself there. It's so cathartic to tell a politician you're going to jail. Like, I do that a lot. I'm like, when I tweet at politicians who've been back in a genocide, I'm like, one day you're going to be behind bars. In my head, I'm like, no, they're not, but it is cathartic.
Absolutely. Look, in an ideal world, they all should be
in an
behind
ideal
bars.
world, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, every member of the British establishment would be behind bars at The Hague, awaiting trial for their complicity in genocide, let alone in any number of other crimes as well, of course.
Well, the seat with Tony Blair's name on it, it's just gathering dust. That fucker should be in The Hague.
Yeah, him, George Bush, a lot of them, yeah.
Talk to me about the political fallout of this. It's a huge win. I think it's a win for freedom of speech as well.
Yeah.
We have had, it feels like every week is the worst week of the Labour Party's life in government. And it's like, we just need to get over this blip, but that something worse happens. What's the political fallout from this? How do you think the majority of people are going to respond to, I would say, a huge government defeat?
In the short term, I don't think it necessarily changes anything because, again, they can just forestall it to the consequential hearing on the 20th, right? And that's what this Labour Party loves to do. They just say, well, I won't be revealing what's in the autumn statement. You'll have to wait until then, which just means you've just got a cliff edge at that point rather than building up to whatever. Anyway, but the point is, I don't think anything will change in the immediate term. The government are still weak as hell and in absolute chaos and stabbing each other in the back and briefing and counter briefing, but not about this topic yet. Because ultimately, if it gets overturned, there will be some serious questions to answer. I think there will undoubtedly be an urgent question debate in Parliament about this, because if it gets ruled that it was never legal, even though it was voted for by the majority of parliamentarians, those parliamentarians will want to know why the information the government gave them was itself unlawful. You gave the highest court in the land, or at least the highest non-judicial court in the land, Parliament itself, and the elected representative chamber of that Parliament, information that was unlawful, which means you are at the very least incompetent or malign actors trying to act in illegal ways to protect X group of people or X movement or X forces. And so I think parliamentarians will want answers to some very probing questions as to how this state of affairs came to be, which puts more pressure on Keir Starmer and exposes far more, of course, the authoritarianism at the very core of this government, whether it's putting people in jail for 4 years for being on a Zoom call where they were planning to cause public nuisance. They got 4 years for that, for a Zoom call, or whether it's putting people in jail for quite rightly calling for the end of genocide against Palestinians, or whatever it is, whether it's trying to get rid of jury trials, which, by the way, Shabana Mahmood, how fucking dare you speak of democratic institutions or democratic action when you are literally trying to strip people's jury trials away from them? Like it's ridiculous. You're literally allowing the blocking of local council elections for a second year running. So you don't get a jury trial, you don't get elections anymore. But apparently they're the keepers they're the protectors of democracy somehow. It's ridiculous. Like, they are allowed to do to appeal this decision. Of course they are. Everyone who loses is potentially allowed to go forward with an appeal at some point. But the point is, this government always do it, especially when it comes to Israel, because they can't accept that there are limitations on their power. They don't see themselves as servants of people. They see themselves as the masters in this situation. And so the fact that there are people who are not involved in the government who have power over them, i.e. the courts, who can say this is unlawful, they just can't accept that. They have to go with it. This didn't surprise me in the slightest that they instantly came out and said, we're appealing this, even though they can't have taken proper legal scrutiny of the decision and legal advice from the Attorney General, because literally she was out there within a couple of hours of it happening. So there's no way she was properly briefed on this, but it's an instant trigger. This has to be done to allow them to defend Israel. That's it. That's all they were interested in. They know it's unlawful. They knew it was unlawful when they did it, but they don't care because it's about defending Israel and nothing else.
Thank you to everyone who tuned in. And by the way, thank you to the donations today. I mean, just one donation is so, we're so grateful, but particularly tonight, it was very, very generous. So thank you for that. And of course, thank you so much, Kevin, for coming on tonight. And you filmed for Ben, actually. But I'm glad you're here. I don't think Ben's watching this, so I'm glad you're here.
Well, look, a COG, as I've always known them, although apparently they do have like a legal name or something. It's a long time acolyte, so I'm much happy to.
But yeah, absolute pleasure that you came on. Of course, remember to like this stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button, hit the notification bell so you know when we go live and a new video drops. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member for just 99p. Before we wrap up, I think we've had just a last-minute dono. So I will read that out. Paul Webster Lincoln. Bad news, Kevin. Bad news. Richard Murphy sold out of seats in Cambridgeshire. Good news. He has some upcoming in Norwich and Edinburgh. I believe you were talking about that, weren't you? The audience can't hear you, but yeah, he's not. But anyway, it's sold out. But he's going to be back in in Edinburgh and Norwich. Again, thank you to everyone who tuned in. My name's Curtis Daly. You've been watching Normal Islands Live. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.